this week, building an RPG world. Whew. So why now with this topic? Here's why. So for years as a younger player, I would GM different games. I would always build my own worlds. Rarely did I play in Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms or Dark Sun or Ravenloft. I would just make my own. When I started freelancing in 2001, I started working within well-established worlds on official Wizards products, right? Living Greyhawk,
Yeah.
Forgotten Realms many, many times, Eberron, Dark Sun, even Nentir Vale and Ravenloft and some of the smaller ones. Since going full-time freelance, I've gotten to do both. I've gotten to build my own and work within existing ones. So Midgard from Cobalt Press, I got to work with. Then I started helping create worlds with Ghostfire and Grim Hollow. Aurora was built on a world I had created long ago. The Ethereal Expanse is something that James Hake had a large part in building. Drakenheim I got to touch on. And now I'm moving into places like Strangehollow. And so world building is a question we get all the time. And I just covered it in my role-playing game writing class. And what I'm coming to find is there is no single bit of great advice or even a set of tips that are reliable that covers everything that you need to know about world building. Because it's such a large topic and there are many different facets to it, whether it's for a role-playing game or a movie or for a book. I've poured through how-to manuals and books out there, and they all tend to sort of be D&D focused. And even as they're D&D focused, they are very slanted to the opinions and the tastes of the person writing about it. One person will go on and on and on about the importance of this one piece, which for me means absolutely nothing in any of the worlds I've ever built and don't even care about, which just goes to show how one person's important thing is another person's dross. Building a pantheon is like this mainstay of world building stuff. And it's like, okay, it may be important in D&D, maybe, but it's not important in any like futuristic cyberpunk games, probably. And even if they do, it tends to be Eurocentric or, ignoring large parts of culture or stepping on large parts of culture. It's so hard to do. So having said that, we're going to try to do exactly what I said not to do, which is give you tips, or at least the basics of world building. What do you think, Teos?
I think it's super interesting. I'm very attracted to this topic. I remember one time I was asked if I wanted to be on a panel for world building, and I thought, no, because it isn't a thing that I've truly done, other than when I was much younger. And like you, I've spent most of my time, especially recently, working with other people's worlds, and because of that, my skills have been how to understand what the objective was, cut through the clutter of what's often in source books, and figure out how to make it good, right? So that it's fun and feels real, which is very hard. But I haven't had to build it, which you've recently, in the last however many years, you've been working on that actual construct it whole cloth and put it together. And I definitely, so I want to learn from that in this session, and then throw in my questions and thoughts around it.
Sounds good. So let's talk about world building basics. And this is true whether you're writing a story, building a world for a fiction, a game, role-playing game, comic book, whatever. You need to understand that for most of these things, you are creating a world with words. So even if you are writing a story, I'm just going to write a short story and I'm going to set it in our world, in our current time. What you are doing is still building a world, because everybody's viewpoint is different. Everyone's world is different. My world is different than Teos's world, is different than the world that you listening are in right now. So when you create this setting, when you create this world, the only thing that you have if you're writing a story are words. If you have comic books or movies, you can use visuals, which are super helpful, but often you don't have that luxury or that luxury a lot for like a role-playing game book. You can include art, absolutely, but most of it building is done through words. So take care with those words. Think about those words and remember that you are not just describing something, but you are actually building the world.
Yeah. So are you saying then, how does one care for the words? Is it by thinking about the audience? Is it by, like, how do you shape that?
Yes, the answer is yes to all of the questions that you were about to ask. You just have to keep in mind that the world that you live in, that you think you are describing, is not the same world as everyone else. Yeah. And you always have to go back and make sure you're using those words in a way that continues to reinforce this world. The next bit of advice is good, but not. And not about the advice we're going to give, but the advice that's given to writers, which is show, don't tell. For beginning writers, this is great advice. It helps reinforce the fact that you want to draw the reader in, and it's often better to draw the reader in by showing a point rather than telling a point. Because showing draws people in, where telling can keep people at a distance.
Yeah.
However, the more advanced you get in your writing, the better advice is don't show and tell. Because sometimes you have to tell. Oftentimes, the best choice is to tell. For clarity's sake, for efficiency, especially in world building, it's okay to say to the reader, there are 9 gods in this world. Those 9 gods represent A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Boom. Now the reader knows this, and you can build from that going on to now show. But if you try to take the time and the energy to show all of that information that you could just say, that you could just tell, you could lose people in the minutia of something that they need to know quickly and efficiently, assuming that those 9 gods are involved in, the building of the world and the plots that are coming out of it.
And and this is like, tell me if I'm on the right track, where if I think of a lot of like older, like 2nd edition source books for D&D, they will give you these huge lore dumps of the history of the everything. And to me, that's where I would love to replace that with just give me the key things that I should do with these factions or entities or whatever.
Exactly. The most recent books, we always get that bulleted list at the front, right? The world is blank, right? Yeah. Life is blank. And it tells you. It's not showing you.
That's true. Yeah.
Through description, through stories, through poems, right? It's just saying, this is this.
Right.
And so you've been told, and now examples can be given. But you, as the person who is going to be building the stories in which you have those touch points, right? So that's what I mean by don't show and tell. Tell when you need to, especially for a role-playing game.
Yeah.
The next bit of advice is details matter unless they don't. So details are important to draw people into the world, right? There are little things that can show what life is like. Little details. However, you always have to think of the importance of these details in the story that you're telling. So you have the world here, you have the story here, and unless the story is going to somehow intertwine with the world, you can leave that part of the world out of your. So, for example, a character walks into a tea house, and you as the writer want to show off your knowledge, and you give a list of 37 different teas that they can order. Very cool details for some people. Most people are going to be like, I don't care. Especially if you do that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean every single person won't care,
Right.
but a lot of people are there for the story.
Yeah.
So unless later the tea that they chose becomes an important part of the story,
Yeah.
then leave that out. Two choices, right? Johann the Bard likes these two types of tea, and they have trouble deciding between the two. Okay, it's a couple of small details. You're characterizing Johann as someone who has trouble choosing. You're doing work there. You get the detail, a couple details. So details matter, but if they don't matter, don't put them in.
Yeah.
And knowing whether they matter or not is your job in the long run.
Yeah, that's cool. I like it.
Okay. Along those same lines, reality matters unless it doesn't. So verisimilitude should be a guiding factor in your designing of a world up to a point. You have to decide, are the rules of physics going to apply? Are the rules of geography and sociology and linguistics, etc.? Are the things that we know as a society, as scientists, as philosophers, is it going to hold true or isn't it? To what degree do you need to make the world real? If you break away from reality, does doing so make the world and the story more interesting or just confusing?
Right.
So those are important things you have to decide. Are you going to be very scientific in your meteorology and geography, right? There in our world, there aren't any swamps next to blank. But in this world, there is. So this world is terrible, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you heard a player say that? Probably not often. So for the most part, it doesn't matter to the reader if your world is scientifically correct. Now, if you blatantly break the law of gravity, there needs to be a reason why, because we all understand that things fall downward toward the larger mass. Right. So if you break that, then there should be a reason and it should be important to the story.
Well, it's funny you say that because when you talked about breaking rules, the first thing I thought of was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and how it captures that beautiful wushu concept of like, you can bounce off walls and spring up a wall and do these amazing flips and soar through the sky and fight on bamboo trees. And that's so beautiful, right? And so evocative. And now it's part of that setting. And once you buy into it, you're totally there, right? And it makes sense.
Yep. And then if it's a role-playing game, your rules need to apply to that.
Yeah.
And the final bit of advice and warning I will give is other tips I've seen, world building tips, are often derived from looking at how Tolkien built worlds, or how George Lucas built worlds, or how Gene Roddenberry built worlds. And the worlds that they built were not built for role-playing game support. Right? The world they built was for fictional support and movie support and television support.
Yeah.
So if you fall back on the world building for other media, You may be missing stuff that you need for building a world for a role-playing game.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So if we jump forward now we're going to talk about world building for specifically for a tabletop role-playing game. While you're building the world, you always have to keep in mind the rules of the game that you're building it for. What do the rules themselves tell you about the world? And how much do you need to change the rules by going with the type of world building that you want to do? That should be your tent post, keeping in mind. If we're building a world for D&D 5th edition, there are some assumptions. Right. Survival after 3rd level is hard to challenge when you can cast Goodberry and you can create water. So that's going to, unless you plan to change the way the rules work, determine your world building. What's a different game that you can think of that might change the way worlds are looked at or worlds are built?
I mean, recently, one that brings just recent discussions that we've had around the lethality in, say, Blade Runner, right? Like that, I was surprised there wasn't more emphasis in the game on sort of the medical system that you would have to have for Blade Runners. If really every time you go out, you could get a critical hit and end up in some serious trauma case, there should be like medevac rules and remote action rules for how you participate from the hospital bed and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. And we talked about Alien, right? The game Alien recently. And sort of that being built on first one particular story.
Yeah.
When I open the game and look at it, and I see the history that is supposed to be behind the game, it sort of doesn't match, right? The rules that I'm looking at about building the character and surviving and shooting xenomorphs doesn't always tie in. Now I'm only looking at the starter set, so maybe there's more there, but it's that sort of thing that needs to connect all the way around. All parts of the rules need to correspond to all parts of the world and make each other better, lift each other up. So you cannot separate world building from storytelling and game design when you're designing a world for a role-playing game. You need to keep in mind what we talked about in the last segment, which with factions is where are the characters and the players looking? Wherever they are looking, wherever their focus and their spotlight is shining, that's what you need to build the most.
That's a great
Things
point.
that are outside of that, you can leave hazy with the understanding that if they turn their head and look there, you better be ready to fill it in.
That I can think of an example there, which is Eclipse Phase, which is a transhuman thing, right? Where you download your personality into different bodies and things like that. It has this world of megacorps and whatevers and governments, but that stuff's totally on the periphery, and you're working for this faction doing stuff. And so that's a great example where, there is a chapter that talks about that, but it's not the focus of the game. And so it is left a little hazy, and it's not a part of your adventures. Versus in Shadowrun, as technology, Renraku, right? We Seder Krupp, we learn to memorize those because that is front and center. They are the powerful entities driving everything and often behind the scenes of any particular adventure. So you got to know them, and they have to be there explained.
Yeah. And so going back to that detail thing, right? The details that you want to work with the most are the things that the characters will be interacting with the most. So, knowing the names of the potion maker, who is the only place to get healing potions from, is going to be more important even than the political leader of the region who the characters might never interact with. Doesn't mean you don't know the name of the king or the queen or the lord or the lady, but you don't need to fill in the details. The potion maker who is going to give them their antitoxins and their healing potions, that's someone that you want to put some detail into when you're building the world. And so that gets to the next topic, which is top-down versus bottom-up design, or inside-out versus or outside-in versus inside-out. So what does that mean? It means bottom-up is where you focus on only the things that the characters are going to interact with first at the micro level. So if they start the adventure in a tea house, you want to know the name of the tea house, who works at it, those things that the characters are going to interact with. You don't need to know the trade routes of the 7 kingdoms.
Right.
You might not even need to know the 7 kingdoms. But you need to start at that bottom, at that inside level.
Can I just start
and work your way out?
It's hilarious. Merrick Blackman's been doing a bunch of blog entries about old classic adventures, and some of them, especially in the Mortal series, do this where they will tell you all of this backstory, none of which you get to really use in the adventure, or most of which you don't. And it's fascinating how they'll tell you, all these different empires and the whatevers, and that's great if you can figure out how to use that, but you may not use it in a particular adventure, and yet it's all kind of there.
When I was running Living Greyhawk, my region of Keoland, I got an adventure in that I had to edit. And the first page and a half, so 2 columns, right? 1 column, another column, and then a 3rd column on the next page was the backstory of the villain. And it literally started 10,000 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, okay, this is a lot of information about what happened over these 10,000 years to this, the big, bad, evil creature. It's a lot of information. Will it be relevant to anything that the players interact with? And the answer was not an iota, not one smidge of that backstory mattered at all to what the players had to do, which was basically march into the forest and kill this creature. There wasn't any historical reenactments, ghostly thing. There wasn't a puzzle that you needed to know the history.
My backstory is 10,000 years, and I was killed by adventurers who didn't bother to learn it.
Yes. Not only didn't bother to learn it, had no way to learn it.
Yeah. That's my favorite.
No way.
That's the best.
Way to interact with
when the players will never have a reason to know this thing, but somehow it got into the product.
And it's a storytelling. It's a primal storytelling urge. I do not begrudge the person who wrote that.
Sure.
And I do not begrudge anyone who has that tendency, because it is in our very DNA to want to, if you're a storyteller, to want to start in the beginning.
Yeah.
And to have that removed from us would remove any storytelling impulses from us. But we need to,
serve the audience and the purpose and all that.
Exactly. Exactly. So, so I feel everybody out there who says, "Oh, but when I was in the MFA program, we would have open mics where people would read their works in progress," and I swear that at least 40% of the stuff that the fiction writers who wrote longer pieces or even shorter pieces would start with is like this biblical in the beginning kind of stuff. Because you do need to create the world with words, but you need to create the world in which we are hearing the story.
No, I mean, I'm the kind of designer who, if someone says to me, like, "Hey, do something for, the Temple of Elemental, for return to the Temple of Elemental Evil," I'll go, "Great, let me go brush up on the Battle of Emerald Meadows.
Right.
And it's like, why? But that is where my brain wants to go. And fortunately over time, and with the help of good, kind people, I've learned like, you may, if you want to do that, fine, but the
Right.
product must serve the end goal of whatever it is. And probably you won't use any of that. You could use it to help you set the tone and the color so that it all links
Yeah.
together nicely.
Yeah. And that's something that we're going to get into in a bit is the tone
Cool.
and the atmosphere and prompts for helping you build, which is different than the final product of the setting or the world that you've built.
I want to add, you said a really nice thing that when you were at Gamehole last year and you did a seminar on world building, one of the things that I really liked from you and Joe Rosso talking about was the idea of top down, bottom up. The idea of like, do you start with the cosmos and the gods, right? Like how everything was formed, right? That's way top. Or do you start with, here's this village and the immediate threats that the characters are going to deal with and what their life is like. And that's such a great, that whole like where, and you can do a bit of both, but those it leads to really different outcomes. And so it's important to think about what the point of the product is as to where you should start and how much time to devote on any of those.
Yeah. And that brings around a great point, which is most of the time, top down versus bottom up is you're going to do both for a role-playing game because the rules themselves require you to do certain things top, whereas the adventure, the stories that the DM and the players will be going through require you to start down at the bottom. So what you are best served by doing most of the time is starting at the bottom and saying, all right, in this campaign, as the DM, I want to start this way, or as the adventure designer for other DMs to buy and run, I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to build my way up until I get to a point where I have to answer an important question. Once I hit that point where I have to answer an important question, I will jump to the top, deal with that. Once I've dealt with that, I can see the ramifications of where it's going to come out with that in the story. Then I'll jump back to the bottom and continue till I hit another roadblock because I need to know what the gods are.
Right.
Okay, now I will do that. Now I need to know what the kingdoms are named. All right, and I will jump up and do that. But always thinking when you're down here working from the bottom up, always be thinking of the larger picture.
Yeah.
Then when you jump up to the larger picture, always keep thinking about how it's going to manifest itself through the details of the adventure and the micro settings that you're creating within the world.
That's a great point. Yeah, like if you're thinking about a Dune world, right? Like you might start with your house, you're on Arrakis, this is what matters. You don't talk about the other houses until you actually need to, because if you started with here are the major houses, like I'm already lost, right? Like, and if you tried to explain that to your players at a gaming session, but it's not going to come up, right? So you don't. Generally, we only think of two houses until the others come in here and there, right? But it's generally just two that we're focused on, yours and the enemy, right?
It's very, very true. The last part of this is sometimes writing a world in a certain way means changing the rules of the game. And that's okay. You just have to then think of the ramifications of what does this mean if I change the rules so that X becomes an important factor in the game where it usually isn't. Or usually they have this resource, but I'm going to remove that resource to make this setting and the stories that are told within that setting more interesting. And that's going to be a tension that you have to deal with if you choose a specific game and then write a slightly different setting within that game.
Yeah.
I want to talk real quick about Microscope, which is a role-playing game that is a world-building tool. I've done more world building as professionally in the last 8 weeks than probably in the last 20 years combined.
Wow.
Building a world from the ground up, because I'm working on several different projects that just happen to be doing exactly that. The only exception would be working on Aurora, Age of Desolation, where I built that outline for the world and other people did it. But what I noticed is there's a game called Microscope by Ben Robbins, and it provides a nice guide for and a structure for collaborative world building and then role playing some things within the world that you've just created. And as I stepped through the steps of Microscope, I realized that without even knowing it, when I was building Aurora, I was sort of doing the same thing. What Microscope does is it has you as a group create a one sentence big picture for your world. What is your world about in very vague terms? So Star Trek would be, right, perfected humanity reaches out into the stars. Like Star Trek is Star Wars would be, galactic empire versus plucky rebels in a galactic war. Harry Potter would be, right, young wizards in a world of non-magic dominance, tries to survive, et cetera, et cetera. And then you start building your history in these big chunks of time. And what happens? What can we say about that? So the Dark Ages, and then the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment would be big periods of time. Within those times, you create events that are important to the world. And within those events, you can make scenes which show actual things playing out around those events. And it's just a really cool, I mean, that's the 20-second, but it's a great way not to necessarily build a fantasy RPG world from scratch, but to at least start to get those topics.
Yeah.
And doing it as a group can be a lot of fun.
It's great. I've never done Microscope. That's awesome. Great to hear.
Well, we'll have to try it sometime.
Ooh, yeah.
It's a full night. It's a full night of work. So,
Well,
but it
a
can be
smaller version of that is we talked about fate, right? And how fate will often,
Right.
declare aspects and things like that. Those are small ways to little microcosms of capture of the setting, which can be really great too.
Yeah, and a lot of fate games also have you build mini settings where your characters hold sway. So that's another, get at that. So the last thing I want to talk about is showing how these challenges work with a real life example.
Awesome.
And so I want to talk about surviving Strangehollow. So at the end of 2023, I joined this project with the publishing company called Accidental Cyclops. And Mikey and Jason from Accidental Cyclops came to me and showed me art from an artist named Emily Hare. Now, normally when you're making a role-playing game, you get the idea, you write the world, you write the rules or adopt the rules. And then at the end of the whole process, you're like, oh yeah, we need art. Here are some art briefs based on the things we've created. Off they go to the artist and we're good. So doing it this way, completely in the opposite way of building a world and building a game or structuring a rule set to support a game, was hugely interesting and challenging for me. So I looked at this art and it was adorable and it was ethereal and it was mysterious and it was foreboding at the same time. And you say, how can it be adorable and foreboding? It seems to be at odds. And it is at odds. But like wild animals are, even if they're cute, they can be dangerous, right? You can see the biggest, burliest of strong men walk down the street and a chihuahua comes at them and they flinch, right? Because this little thing, you can't control it. And it does have teeth and it does have claws.
Yeah.
And it can't probably kill you, but it's that natural reaction. And so that's what I noticed in this art. It captures sort of the terror of nature as well as the comedy of it all at the same time.
And if you're listening right now, just go to get.accidentalcyclops.com and you can see the pictures that are neat. And like there's this, sort of funny mushroom covered creature that looks funny, but also has these big jagged teeth. And it presents that question of, is this thing actually my friend or not?
Yeah. And what is it? What can it do? If any creature has survived for this long, it has defenses.
Right.
And so what is its defense? And when it comes at you, all cute and hoppy, right? A little toad with a big mushroom on it. What do? Your reaction might be to run away. Okay. Your reaction might be just to kill it. Well, what defenses does it have? So it's all this stuff going through my head as I'm looking at just the art. So what the challenge has been, and will continue to be through the Kickstarter and beyond, will be to imagine and describe this world that Emily has started to create through her art. But as we've been talking about this whole session, what's just as important as capturing the artist's vision of the world is figuring out what stories and what challenges are going to resonate with game masters. What are the players going to want to interact with? And what should the results and consequences of those interactions be? Choosing to set it with 5e rules automatically means certain things. Mm-hmm. So we have to take that into account as we build the world. And so what changes are we going to make to 5e rules to capture sort of the survival harshness of this realm, along with the comedy of it, along with the sort of goofiness of it, the sort of, I think of it as like Heart of Darkness on this side and Monty Python on this side, right? And those are two completely opposite things, right? Mm-hmm. Apocalypse Now, for those of you who watch movies and don't read books, right? This sort of going into the unknown, and it's not good, mm-hmm. versus the comedy of these cute little creatures are probably going to kill you in one way or another if you're not very, very careful. It's the killer bunny.
Yeah, right.
Right. But more serious, mm-hmm. while still keeping the sort of goofiness of it. So all of that is in progress as we speak, as we hired writers to write fiction based on this. And then we're going to meld the rules we already have with the fiction that they're writing and Emily's art and sort of build this setting, as well as building the experience of gameplay that will come out of all of these different sources coming together into one coherent, I pray, if I'm doing my job well, product.
I'm sure it's very coherent and very cool. I can't talk about what I saw recently, but I saw something you'd written and I loved it because it was vintage you. You hand it in, you're like, I don't know if this is any good or needs to be completely rewritten. And I read it and I go, Jesus. And I read it to my family because I'm like, look here are the words that Shawn just put together for this concept. And it was so good. And it had to do with this kind of idea of like world building and things players can use. And it was so good. So I'm sure that this is great. I can't wait to see it. And you've got a lot of other really cool team members on this project too. So,
yeah, we've brought in Ed Greenwood, Elisa Teague, Brian Steele, mm-hmm. Dale Kingsmill, James Hake, and Aaron Roberts working on the fiction and world building side of things. And we're going to have more people coming in, but we have Dan Dillon, some of you may have heard of him, coming in to help out with the rules side of things, creating new rules and adjusting 5e rules to fit this. And it's going to be so much work, but it's going to be a work of love. And I'm just excited. My blood is gushing just thinking about getting a chance to work on this. So what I hope to do through Accidental Cyclops is sort of have a bit of a designer journal to both update through the Kickstarter and beyond, to sort of share this process and help people who may be trying to build something on their own see some of the pitfalls and some of the challenges and help them get over them.
That's great. Well, I love the concept of world building. This was very helpful to me to think about it and talk to you about it. So thanks for that. And I look forward to seeing how you do the world building through Accidental Cyclops and the surviving Strangehollow project. So thanks, Shawn.
Thank you. And more importantly, thank you out there for listening. I hope this has been enlightening and entertaining in one way or another. And we want to thank specifically the people who support our Patreon. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/masteringdnd. And to our Master of Dungeon supporters, thank you. To our Master of Realm supporters, you are in our show notes and in our hearts. And the Masters of the Multiverse, well, y'all get a shout out right now. We'll go from the bottom up this time with Chris Webster, Xavier Wozniak, Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Trace, Krishna Simonse, Andy Shockney, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Mighty Zeus, Mike Olson, Falcon Neal, Shawn Molly, The Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, The Mathemagician, Chad Lench, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Chad Jackson, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, The Mighty Jerd, Nathan Fuller, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, Seth Eckel, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders from Lazy Wolf Studios, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you. If you would like to become a patron, again, you can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd. If you get a chance, you can also give us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts or subscribe to us via YouTube. So, Teos, where can people find you specifically?
Moi, you can find me at alphastream.org. Shawn, where are you hiding?
You can find me on all of the social media places at Shawn Merwin, and the podcast itself is at Mastering D&D on all of those same places. And we're also on YouTube at the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel. So we've built some worlds, Teos. What are we going to do now?
You know, on our Discord, someone recommended the Delicious Dungeon anime cartoon on Netflix. It's wild, and I'm contemplating how I would write up that world.
Okay. I've heard about that recently as well, and I'm going to go get me some ogre brains.
Ooh, I bet those are great when you pan fry them.
Just like Mom used to make.